Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
My Dogman friend brought his puppy to meet me. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story about 3 dogmen that I encountered, and one that I became friends with. In my mind, at least. I felt a genuine bond with him, and it lasted for over a decade, our friendship, but it didn't start off all warm and fuzzy. In fact, our experiences with the dog-headed people started off as absolutely terrifying. We almost gave up and moved out. That's how scared we were of the creatures. When I say we, I mean me and my wife Sandy. When we first moved into that property in northern Michigan that our son is raising his family on now, Sandy and I were just starting out in life. She was expecting Tommy at the time, and we needed a place that was a little bigger than where we had been living. Both of us worked out of home, even back then, so we decided to ditch the city long before it became the hipster trend. These days we live about 20 miles from the house, in an area that's a bit more populated. Because my wife is undergoing medical treatments in a medical center, it's a long story. But our son and his family have trap cams set up around the old property, and they keep an eye out looking for any new generation of dogmen that might wander through the area. So far, all of our sightings and events occurred during the period I'm about to tell you about, but I really do hope that someday the family might pass through again in their annual migration. But back then, we certainly did not welcome the dogman. I guess it's over 40 years ago now, which is amazing, because it feels like this all happened just last weekend. When we bought the place, we got it at a song, and we never wondered why. It was just like the start of 872 different horror movies, but we didn't spot that pattern. Like, why was the place so cheap? Just because God provides for young families? That was how we looked at it, that God was smiling down on us. We couldn't figure out what anyone would find imperfect about our little piece of paradise. So, one night in our new house, Sandra woke me up from a sound sleep and started saying words that didn't mean anything to me. I remember being annoyed at her until I gazed past her, and I saw what I took as a werewolf from a Hollywood movie, standing on our roof ledge outside our second-story bedroom window, and staring in at us. I screamed like I was acting in a Nicolas Cage movie, and I leaped out of bed. The creature jumped off the ledge and ran away, but I still screamed for Sandy to get in the closet and close the door for protection. She refused and told me to calm down, but I was fired up. I was a guy in his early 20s protecting his pregnant wife, and I ordered her into the closet while I checked out the window. She continued to ignore me as I threw on my sneakers and ran downstairs with my baseball bat. I ran around the backyard bellowing about how this was my land now, and any big hairy werewolves that used to live there now had to move out. Absolutely nothing responded. The beast had probably run a quarter mile away by then. I really had my adrenaline pumping though, so I just kept screaming. I was incredibly scared of what I had seen, but I wanted it to be scared of me instead. So what exactly had I seen out there? Well, it was big. It was bigger than I was. It stood up like a man or a Bigfoot monster, but it was neither. It was like a dog, but it was upright, in that way that a bear can get. It was more fast-moving and flexible than a bear, though. And this is why I went with the werewolf name at first. It wasn't wearing clothing, though. This was an animal that looked like a werewolf. It also had nipples on its belly, so I think I was seeing a female. What a female animal would be doing up on my roof staring in my window at night, I am not sure. Maybe she lost something. To me, it seems more like the behavior of a young male, but this was a female. I saw it briefly, but I saw enough to be certain. I wouldn't know the name of that species, but I wouldn't know that I saw a female version of that species. This was the early 1980s, and I do think they had game trail cameras of one sort or another back then. But we weren't game trail people, so we didn't think of that. We were really city folk, and we had no idea what we were dealing with. There was one particular librarian back then who helped us get a bit of perspective on what was going on. My wife Sandy just flat out told the woman what we had seen on our roof looking in at us, and that librarian's eyes got wide. We were lucky that she was an open-minded lady, and she showed a few old articles to my wife on microfilm or microfiche or something. It seemed that there was a pre-existing legend describing exactly what we saw, and the name of that legend was the Dogman. So we had gotten a visit from a mother Dogman. Why had it been looking in? Did it have something to do with my wife being pregnant? I know that seems like a reach, but there was, and still is, some aspect of that sighting that seems strange, even by the already strange standards of cryptid sightings. The fact that it was noticeably a female, but she was alone and not with her pack or tribe, seems to me to make this an extremely out-of-the-ordinary occurrence. Now, I did not know about this next part until afterward, but my wife Sandra had been putting out meat, hanging from trees. She was hoping to draw the female Dogman back that she had awakened me to get me upset over. She never asked my opinion about doing this, and she never warned me that she was going to do it either. I know that you can't share everything with your mate, but it felt out of the ordinary for her to be so quiet about doing such a thing. Maybe she thought I'd grab my baseball bat and throw another screaming fit in the backyard. And maybe I would have actually done that too. At any rate, she was hanging cold cuts or something out there. I'm not sure exactly what. But she was hanging it up in trees, thinking that only tall animals could eat it then. Birds and squirrels could get at it too, but my wife thinks with her mythic imagination. Oh, I'll put the meat up high so only the Dogman will eat it then. She can be very illogical, but she is so charming that the universe itself bends its own rules to please her and to stay on her good side. In this case, she hung baloney out to dry, and then one night, I looked out the window, and I saw that Dogman lady in our backyard. This time she was being circled by a tiny little pup. It was very excited and barked like a terrier or something. The mother ignored it and kept walking straight across my yard, almost like she was in a somnambulistic trance. The Dogman pup circled her, prancing on 4 legs, 2 legs, 3 legs, dancing like a playful moon, orbiting her as she crossed the lawn as though it were the heavens. This time it was me waking my wife up to tell her of what I'd seen outside, and I was quite surprised when she wasn't at all. Surprised, I mean. In fact, I was the stunned one when she lit up brightly and acted as though she had been planning all along to get that lady Dogman to come back. Guiltily, she admitted that this was exactly what she had been doing. We bickered about it, but we were both too busy to let the bickering last much into the next day. I had my business to keep afloat, and she had both that and her pregnancy to cope with. We didn't see the creatures again until after she gave birth to our son Tommy, or Thomas, as he prefers to be called now that he's a father of his own. The next memory I have of the Dogman was the puppy, now more of a teenager, dancing around the edge of the yard and barking, or yapping, at my toddler son as I watched from the kitchen, feeling helplessly far away. My wife was right there, but she was sitting and doing nothing, allowing the young Dogman and our helpless child to stare each other down. Tommy did not even know how to speak yet. He was still that young. And yet for some reason, Sandy was allowing the two of them to stare unimpeded at each other. My eyes scanned the woodline for the mother, but I didn't see it anywhere. I knew that if I went out there blustering and making noises, I might excite both mother bears, the Dogman one and the human one. So I did walk out back but I did it as quietly as I could. Then I nearly tiptoed past my wife and up to our child. I grabbed Tommy from behind and lifted him up so that I could carry him back into the house. My wife protested, saying that the two were getting to know each other. The dogman was getting to know our kid. He was getting familiar with our toddler. Now, why was that something I should want to have happen? I remember questioning Sandy's mothering instinct, and we had a much larger fight that time. The thing is, we never saw that mother dogman again. The boy seemed to be on his own as far as we could tell, at least when he came by to visit us. He was so friendly and playful that eventually we did allow him to play games with our growing son. I don't mean this happened in a week. I mean that when our son was 5 or 6, he would sometimes play with the dog and pet him a little. When he was 7 or 10, they would play catch and frisbee. This dogman grew a bit faster than our son, but he didn't grow as fast as a normal dog might. His childhood lasted for years, whereas a normal dog's might last for months. The thing is, he lived on his own in the wild at an early age, just the same as any other kind of wild dog might. Neither Sandy nor I have ever read about dogman having lifespans as humanoid as this, so maybe this creature we lived near was different from the norm. Maybe he developed more slowly than what would normally be the rule. But we observed a creature that was really a lot like humans, and yet was thoroughly and 100% a really fun and pleasant canine puppy. We used to call him our second son, and we were only half joking. He lived in the woods, and yet still managed to eat us out of house and home. I really did grow to love him, and I felt a bit sad each time he'd run back into the woods after he'd gotten his fill of supermarket dog food and fun times playing with his human friends. I wish he could come sleep in our house, but I knew he was growing up to be a monster in quite literal terms, and I knew that you can't just invite a monster into your home, not even a nice one, as lovable as that dogman pup that we had growing up in the woods just behind our home. We kinda had different names for him over the years, but they were always sort of descriptive of his mysterious nature. Like we called him the Yeti for a while, and we called him Gary Busey, because Gary Busey was in a werewolf movie back then. We didn't see the film till much later, and we were disappointed to learn that Gary was not actually the werewolf in the film. This was sad for us to learn, since we had also called the creature Buddy and Buddy Holly, just because Gary Busey once played Buddy Holly. Meanwhile, I don't think Gary Busey ever played a werewolf, and that dogman didn't look anything like Gary Busey, so it's weird the way things get started sometimes. One thing that I've read about dogman pups doing, that we experienced, was that they do sometimes share their kills with you, if they respect you. Usually that's more of a feline thing to do than canine, but our dogman friend did this for us. We did not enjoy seeing disgusting dead things, or parts of them, outside our front or back doors randomly in the morning. But we tried to act like we saw it as an honor, in case the dogman was watching. Fortunately, Sandy took it as her job to clean up these messes, since she was the one who had attracted the beastman to habituating near us. We took care to bring the nastiness inside, before throwing it in garbage bags, and then sneaking it out the back to the garbage, which we kept in bear-proof cans that the dogman didn't know how to get into. Our son Tom is one of the few rare individuals who can claim to have been rescued by the dogman, but he was passed out at the time, so he wouldn't remember any of that. For a while, Tommy and his friends went through a period where they were experimenting with things that they didn't want their parents to know about. Tommy became secretive and distant, and I remember that we were worried. One night the dogman Gary woke us both up, tapping on our window. When I got up, he jumped downstairs and ran circles in a frantic way. I put on my shoes and met him in the yard, where he took off running. I turned around and went back inside, thinking that dog was just crazy, when my wife handed me a flashlight and said, "He wants you to follow him." Sure enough, the dogman ran back to me when I didn't follow him. I turned the flashlight on, and then he led me into the night. Eventually, he showed me my son lying unconscious under a tree, and at first I thought he'd lost his life. He was only wasted and passed out, and I was so angry at him. He wasn't dressed warm enough for that night, and he was going to get himself very sick, but the dogman saved him all that. The dogman might have saved his life that night, as I thought my kid was asleep in his bed. I wouldn't have realized till the middle of the next day that he was even missing, probably, since he slept late on weekends. I carried the kid home, which gave me a back issue that I still have today. He was too old to be carried around anymore, and it was the dogman that clued us in that we needed to teach our son how to stand on his own two legs as a man. Rather than punish him in any ordinary sense, I challenged him to a drinking competition instead. Let him try to drink like his father, if that's what he wants to do. I'd like to say I drank the brat under the table, but it was really more of a tie. The point was, when we shared the toilet to throw up into later, my son and I were bonded deeply for life. He was a man now, and that couldn't have happened without the dogman making me go get him out of the cold, dark night. Our family owes a lot to that dogman. He was the best friend our clan ever had. This was why, when Tommy was in high school, it bothered us so much that the dogman ceased coming around. I mean, I suppose it was just as well. Tom had become very social, and he wouldn't exactly be able to invite his friends over if there were a wild predator hanging around, eating all our cold cuts and leaving half a dead raccoon on the doorstep each morning.
But even Tom began to miss the beast as he got ready to head off for college. I guess we wanted to know if the little guy was okay. We worried that he didn't make it, since life in the woods can get quite harsh, obviously. Sandy told Tommy to think good thoughts of our little Yeti. Tell him that we love him, and let him know that you're moving away to college. Tom took her advice to heart and did what she asked him to do every night before bedtime. Then when it came time for us to have our one last backyard cookout before our son left for the university, the three of us stopped laughing and chattering with each other when we heard the leaves moving and parting behind us. There, walking into our yard, was a beast man as tall as a mountain. He was over 7 feet tall, and his shoulders were so broad that it looked like he had NFL shoulder pads on. He wasn't a man, though. His body was covered in thick fur instead of clothing. His head was canine, with tall ears, and a face that progressively lightened in color, approaching its pitch black nose tip. This was our dogman pup. This was Gary. Or else it was another of his clan, because the colorings and markings were so similar. Was this beast there to interrupt our barbecue and slaughter all of us? What was his intention in standing there staring at us? The moment remained absolutely silent except for the wind. Not a single cricket chirped, nor did any bird. The entire world held its breath. This little wobbly walking puppy attempted to trot out from behind his dad on his 2 hind legs. He got a foot or 2 out in front before pratfalling on his own dog's snout and causing the 3 of us to burst out laughing. The big one was our friend. The little clumsy one was his son. Well, we tossed table scraps at them and they sampled some of our dinner before our old friend picked his yappy brat up and tossed him onto one of his massive shoulders way up in the sky. We all said goodbye with a stare, and I admit I was a bit emotional when the 2 of them left. It felt very final, to be sure. My wife and son both felt certain that he only came back with his son that one time,
in response to Gary's wish for him to do so. You can't talk them out of this belief, although I don't subscribe to that kind of thinking. I figure we just got lucky. He was there and we were there, and we got to say a final goodbye. If our cookout was the night before or after, it probably just wouldn't have happened. Sandy and Tom both scoff at that and say I'm nuts. Why else would the two of those creatures have made the trek they did back to see us, except to respond to Tom's mentally projected request? But one thing we kind of all do agree about is that we probably won't see the Dogman around that property again. Or if one is sighted, it probably would not be from that friendly clan that we used to interact with. They could be in an entirely different state or even a different country by now, considering how close that property is to Canada. So there's a real sad edge to thinking back on this story, knowing that it will always remain nostalgia and in the past. I wish I could see my old friend and his family again, but they're wild creatures meant to live free. We have no clear photos of any of them which survive, so I will have to content myself with the joyful memories I have of the time that. My Dogman friend brought his puppy to meet me. Elderly Dogman and Pup. Dear Bigfoot, care of Scary Stories NYC. My father and grandfather were coal miners in northwestern Pennsylvania in the 20th century, and both of them told me stories of Tommyknockers down deep underground. That's why, when I saw a really big and really old Dogman back then, I had first called it a Tommyknocker. I knew it wasn't a Bigfoot, because it had this head that looked more like a dog or a wolf than anything else. I might have thought it was an old pointed-eared mutant bear, except that whenever any of us saw it, it was always walking around with a little dog that we all referred to as its grandson. Now looking back on it, I suspect that I was looking at a Dogman and its grandson for real. But since I have no film of any of the sightings, I can't really say for sure. Let me tell you what I remember and see what you think about all this. My family moved around a bit in those days, but wherever we moved, my dad's miner friend Smokey moved with us, and so did his son Shorty, who was my best friend. Sometimes they even lived with us for a while until they could find their own place again, but they were always nearby. Basically, my father and Smokey were these sort of self-styled intellectual coal miners. Like they actually referred to themselves as proletariat. I'm not even joking. They were union members, and at least to some degree, they seem to have been agitators for change. I imagine that's why they were always getting fired and always getting new jobs, and we were always moving. But work was never discussed with us kids, and I'm not even sure how much was shared with my mom. Shorty's mom had passed away when I was very young, and I don't have any memories of her. So during this period, Smokey and Shorty were living in the room upstairs in a former barn that the previous owners had converted into a garage with an upstairs bedroom. This structure was in the yard behind our old rundown farmhouse that we were renting. Soon after we moved in, Shorty started telling me that he and his dad were seeing a big old booger walking around at night, and that we should make sure to lock up the house at night so that the oversized critter didn't get in and eat us out of house and home. Or just eat us. I wondered how big this dog was, and I passed the message on to my parents that there might be large scavengers trying to break in at night. I didn't think too much more about it until I had a sighting of my own. Like I said, when I saw that thing, the first thing I thought was that must be what a Tommyknocker looks like if it comes above ground. And since nobody in my family ever saw a Tommyknocker, they only heard them, I can't say for sure. Maybe the Dogman is the Tommyknocker, I just don't know. But if they are, then Tommyknockers are mammals. Mammals who take care of raising their young. I know that because I saw the young Dogman before I even saw the large old one. Here's the way it happened. I went out back to sleep upstairs in the barn with my friend Shorty and my dad's friend Smokey. We all told scary stories after dinner and stayed up late, looking around outside the barn for the giant booger monster that they'd been seeing. He didn't come around that night, and we all soon fell asleep in chairs by windows watching outside in the night. When I woke up, the sky was just beginning to start to turn colors with the dawn. I had never seen such a sky, and I yawned and I stretched, and I got up to enjoy the show of the constantly changing colors of the sunrise. Downstairs outside, I saw a little young dog playing around, and I became interested in its funny antics. It would chase a flying bug, then get distracted by a colorful rock, then run off to chase a helicopter high in the sky. The puppy was making me chuckle, and I resolved to go down there and play with it. But just a split second before I was about to head down to ground level, around the corner of the outside of the barn, walked the freaking Bumble from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Do you know what I mean? That kid's Christmas special from the 60s? The big white monster in it. The abominable snowman. Well, a nasty old beat-up looking version of that walked around the corner of the barn, casually leaned down, picked the puppy up in one hand, and walked off with him. I thought he was going to eat the pup, but then instead he just plopped the little guy up on his right shoulder, and off he trotted, off the property and into the pre-dawn woods surrounding it. I tell you, when it came around that barn corner, its head was only about a foot below the level of the second-story barn window that I was looking out of. So how tall did it have to be? Over 10 feet tall at least. Probably more like 12. If that monster was that size in his young prime, he would have been big and strong enough to tear an elephant in half. As it was, when I saw him, he was clearly very old and moving quite slowly. But there was no man in the world who could take him on in a fight. This first sighting all happened so fast that I didn't have time to wake anybody up. But I did once the creatures were gone. I told Shorty and Smokey that I had seen a big Tommyknocker, and that it was friends with a puppy. Let me try to remember exactly how I told them, because that was my first impression, before I had the idea that this might be a family of dogmen or werewolves I was seeing. Back then I didn't know what it was, but I'll tell you what I remember looking at. The big one. This was an old creature. It was well past its prime, and I imagine it was mainly putting in the effort of sticking around to help the young one get a good start in life. I once read that some animals will keep growing larger the longer they live. Maybe this guy was like that. That's what I was kind of referring to earlier. If he was that huge when he was still his strongest, I bet he would be able to run really fast, and I bet he had an appetite, when he was younger, that demanded he eat as much as some entire wolf packs. But maybe he was never this large when he was fast and young and strong. Maybe the size only came with age and slowness, I just don't know. This was a creature with hands and thumbs, and arms and shoulders like a man, but covered in a light-colored fur that seemed to have a dark undercoat possibly. I remember dark patches where fur was missing. Maybe the flesh was dark black, and the fur light blonde, I don't know. Maybe the old beast was mangy and missing fur, or maybe I was seeing something else each time, like black stains on the fur. I don't really know because every sighting was unexpected. Every sighting came in odd lighting at dawn or at night. And none of the experiences lasted very long as they were happening. As slow-moving as the Tommyknocker Dogman seemed to be, he still never stuck around for very long. By the way, I'm the only one who called him a Tommyknocker. I'm not trying to say that's what he was. I'm just saying that was the one monster I had heard of, living in western PA. The Tommyknocker. And so I thought that's what this was. No, this looked like the Bumble from TV, but with more of a werewolf-type head. It was dog-like or wolf-like, but it was the head of a monster man. It was taller than a dog head, more like a human head in that sense. But it had the dog snout, the black dog nose, the upright dog ears. Both the adult and the pup had black eyes that sometimes glowed a sort of golden-orange color. It was off and on, though. They mainly looked like black eyes, but they would catch reflections and absolutely looked like paranormal creatures from hell when they did. That was about the only similarity between the two creatures, really. Well, I mean, the little one had upright ears also, and the coloring was very similar. It was a dog, but an ordinary one. It just ran around on the ground yipping and yapping. I mean, my first impression was that this was the pet of the larger creature. But when my family started to see the two of them together more often, they all got the general impression that this was a family that they were viewing. My family felt that the little pup was going to grow up to have hands and arms and shoulders, just like the big Bumble that it walked around with and on whose shoulder it rode. We moved out of there before the year was over. We never got to see that happen. So it just remains a theory of the period. Maybe the little dog was just a little dog. To my family, though, it was a big werewolf and his grandson. That was the interpretation that got cemented into our family folklore. My dad's friend Smokey had actually come from a logging family in the Midwest, and he brought with him stories of the Midwestern Dogman. I read online recently that loggers back in the day liked to scare newbies with stories of imaginary local monsters in those woods. But Smokey never got any memo about them being made up or imaginary critters. Oh sure, some of them he knew were pranks like the hodag. But Smokey was convinced that there were real werewolves in the forests of the Midwest, and that one of them had strayed over to western Pennsylvania with his yappy little grandson. I don't know enough to say that Smokey was wrong, but I don't know enough to prove that he was right either. One time the creatures walked through a muddy patch and I bugged my parents about making plaster casts of the footprints. They didn't know what I was talking about. We had some cement mix left over from a building project my dad had done earlier, so I made some cement mix on my own, and I poured it all over the footprints. Well, when my mother saw what I had done to her backyard, she had my father break it up and throw it all away in the trash. It was like talking to a wall trying to explain to them that the footprints might be valuable to science, or whatever it was I was saying. So I hadn't done it the right way, and you couldn't really see what that was in the concrete I had poured. That was not the right way to do things, but I was a kid, and at least I was trying. After Smokey and Shorty moved out of the barn, but before Dad and Smokey got new jobs and moved us all again, my mother had a few sightings of the two beasts, which she was deathly afraid of. Personally, I thought that the pup looked friendly, and the only reason I hadn't tried to make friends with him was that the adult was so intimidatingly large. But my mother told me to stay away from that small one. She was convinced that he was the same species as the large one, and that he was not as sweet as he might have looked from a distance. She told me wild animals are wild, and they are animals. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it was a simple point that I was missing. I was assuming the pup would act like a puppy from the pet shop. That was probably a very bad assumption. Of course, I never did get to test Mom's hypothesis. For all I know, the dogman picked the puppy up at the pet shop, who's to say? Whatever the nature of their relationship, I do know that the big creature clearly cared for the small one. My mother told me one story of something she saw that horrified her. I was not personally upset by this. I found the story sort of charming, in fact. Tell me how you would react if you saw what my mom saw. She was walking back from the market at around sundown, and she saw the two pale canine creatures off in the woods a ways. Frightened to see them so close to our home, Mom decided that she wanted to see what they were up to. She hid behind some foliage and peeked out at the two animals. What my mother said she saw was the little dog chasing a squirrel back and forth in a patch of woods. When the squirrel scrambled up the trunk of a tree onto a branch, the big dogman picked the little one up and put him on the branch too. And then the squirrel ran inside a hole in the tree, and that little puppy ran into the tree after him. Now to me, this was a funny story because I was a young boy like the little dogman. To my mother, who for whatever reason identified with squirrels, this was a horror story of the most terrifying kind. I wanted Mom to tell me what happened next, but what happened next was my mother ran home in tears, sad about what might have happened to that squirrel. She didn't stick around to see what would happen next. Her day had already been ruined. She felt genuinely unsafe with that abominable dogman living nearby, but I didn't see any evidence that he would cause trouble if left unprovoked. I kind of admired him. It was like having a local celebrity around. I didn't think he would hurt a human except in self-defense or in defense of his pup. My mother, however, was not so sure. There is only one anecdote which seems to speak to this, and it's not something that happened to anyone directly related to me. In fact, I don't even remember the guy's name. I only met him one time, and we had one conversation. Him and my father and me over the front gate of our house one Saturday. My father and I were out cutting the grass and pruning hedges and so forth on that day. Well, my dad was doing that and I was assisting. This guy came by asking us really weird questions, like did we have a polar bear living around there? And did we know if werewolves were real or just in the movies? Now, anyone else might have thought this guy was having a bad trip, but my dad and I knew exactly what this stranger was gibbering about, and so we went over to talk to him. It seems he was wondering if he had lost his mind. He had been making a delivery to a house, and when he went to get back in his truck, there was a puppy inside the cab, on the passenger seat. It was like he was ready to help him make deliveries. Wondering who this cute puppy belonged to, the delivery guy looked around, but the only person he saw was this little old lady who looked like she was having trouble walking back to a house. She was holding onto a big pale dog who provided strength and steadiness for her walk. The big dog was similarly colored to the puppy, so the delivery guy wondered if maybe the old lady was the actual owner. My father and I knew who that old lady was, but we had no idea she had any dogs at all. The driver got his stuff in order and planned to drive the puppy over to the old lady's house once he saw she had gotten home safe. But once he saw the old lady go inside, he saw something else that caused him to doubt everything, including his sanity. Once the dog had walked the old woman safely inside her home, he turned around and stood up on his hind legs like a man. Then he began walking back toward the road in the way a human being would walk. The driver said his knees gave out underneath him, and he sat on the road, back to one of his truck's tires, and he watched helplessly as the huge beast lumbered over to his truck. The driver said he felt like his life was about to end, that the abominable dogman was going to stomp him out of existence. Step by step, the huge dogman got closer, seeming larger with each step. But instead of attacking the man, the beast just reached one incredibly long arm into the cab of his truck and retrieved the little puppy. He placed the pup on his shoulder, and the two lumbered off into the woods together. The driver decided he had lost his mind, and it would be unsafe to drive while schizo. He started wandering down the road instead. We lived 3 blocks from where he left his truck. Poor guy was really in a state of shock. The delivery driver told us that he had just seen all this, and that he was insane. Dad told him he wasn't insane. I said I was wondering how that old lady got around. The poor woman was in such feeble shape. Dad and I told the guy that his story made total sense to us, and then he started to look at us like we were the crazy ones. Eventually, he seemed to calm down enough to start walking back to his truck and resuming his day, but I still think he thought Dad and I were bonkers. My point in including that man's story is that it demonstrates that Mom was wrong about the big old dogman. He was not a man-eater, or certainly he would have eaten that weak old lady who could barely walk and see and hear. Instead, the dogman helped her to survive, so he might have been big enough to be a monster, but he didn't have the heart of a monster. He had the heart of a dogman. Just when you think that John is gone, you find he's going on and on. Now, I don't mean just any John, I only mean John Carnagan. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, John Carnagan, who donated to us using Super Chat on YouTube. Thanks, John. You're one of the good ones. John is also a channel member who gets to see our perks.
The summer's over, face it dear, it's that hoodie time of year. And you know times are never dull when you got the hoodie with the scary skull. Scary skull, scary skull, scary skull, hoodie, scody, skull, hoodie, skull, scary skull. Pull over hoodie, wear it till spring, it's a goodie. You can buy it without a prescription, just follow the link in this video's description.
My little dog scared off a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I remember one winter when I was very young, when our family and friends were besieged by a big dogman for months. None of us had the nerve to stand up to the creature until the smallest one among us proved to be the bravest. We were a group of families set off in the woods by ourselves. There used to be more of a town there, but business moved elsewhere, and soon there were just the 5 families as we referred to ourselves. We were like our own little city-state. These days I hear everyone use the term Doggo to affectionately refer to their pet canines. The first time I ever heard the word, though, it was the name of my little sister Andrea's pet dog. She had named him Doggy when he was a puppy, and when he later grew into an adult, she felt his name should change to Doggo, which to her sounded more grown up. But Doggo never got all that big. Even at his full adult size, he was still a little yappy dog. Doggo wasn't even allowed in the backyard alone, because he was small enough to dig under the fence like a rat or a mole and get away. Okay, remember that part, because it gets to be important later in my story. But now let's cut to the villain of this piece, which in this case is the North American upright walking canine, or the Dogman. When the Dogman first started coming around, he was a scavenger and a pest. He would knock over our garbage cans to eat what was inside. We got bear-proof cans, and then that Dogman started breaking into people's houses and stealing their food. One of the families told us that they were bringing groceries into the house from their car, and the Dogman grabbed a bag of meat and ran off with it. I didn't get to see that myself, but it sounded like they were saying it bit the bag and held it in its mouth as it ran away on its hind legs, leaping over hedges and other obstacles to get away before any of the humans had time to react at all. So, in other words, the Dogman was becoming a bigger and a bigger nuisance. And he was costing us money because we had to shore up our houses and garages to keep him from breaking in and stealing everything edible. We were also very intimidated by this creature. He was getting braver and braver, and my parents told us kids that it might attack a human sooner or later. They were especially concerned that it was getting more familiar with us and less frightened of retaliation. My sister cried every single night after that warning, convinced that the Dogman was going to break in and eat her while she slept. Eventually, our entire family slept in one room upstairs together with no windows in it. That was how scared we had all gotten of the creature. So one day, Andrea was walking around looking for her little Doggo. She was going through the house and calling out to him. He would usually yap from wherever he was and come out happily running to her, but not on that day. Suddenly we could all hear Doggo yapping, but the sound was coming from outside, in front of the house. We ran to the windows and looked out, but none of us could believe what we were seeing. There was Doggo, all right. Somehow he had gotten out. He was standing on the street right in front of our house. He wasn't alone either. Standing there next to him, not up on his hind legs as usual, but now down on all fours, was the Dogman itself. His teeth were bared, and so were tiny little Doggo's.
It looked like we were about to see little Doggo meet his Waterloo, as they say. But Doggo was not ready to leave this world, and in fact, he didn't even seem to realize that he might be in some sort of danger. When the big dogman made an advance toward him, Doggo backed off in shock. Shocked that someone would ever be so mean to him. Then he sort of got this indignant look on his face. He charged at the much larger dogman, yapping and squealing like a chihuahua that someone stepped on the tail of. I swear to you, my entire family laughed at the reaction that came next. That dogman was way bigger than little Doggo. In fact, he was bigger than my dad. But that dogman almost leaped in the air when Doggo yapped and charged him. It was the funniest thing I got to see in my entire childhood. I remember seeing some old cartoon where an elephant was scared of a mouse, and this was like that. The dogman ran off on all fours with his tail literally between his legs, and my father ran outside to bring Doggo back in the house, before that dogman changed his mind and came back around. Except, that didn't ever happen. None of us ever saw that dogman again anymore. After a couple of months, it sunk in that Doggo had really chased the dogman away. It made us all feel a little bit ashamed. Maybe if we had stood up to the dogman ourselves earlier, it wouldn't have stolen so much food from us over that winter. Maybe the real villain of this story was not the dogman after all. Maybe the real villain was our own cowardice.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
I saw a werewolf playing with its pup. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have had one single cryptid experience in my life, but I'm pretty certain I saw 2 cryptids in that one sighting. Let me just describe what happened to me in order and in as much detail as I can remember, and then you can tell me what it was that happened to me that early morning. When I first moved to this rural part of Nomo or northern Michigan, I used to get up early before heading to work and jog on this forest path behind my house. These days I work from home and I run on a treadmill in my bedroom, but in those days I would watch the light change in the morning as I ran, and the sun slowly rose in the sky. It was incredibly peaceful. Well, until the morning when I discovered that I was not the largest mammal in those woods. Not by a long shot. So let's jump straight to the sighting. Now, I didn't see the big one at first, and the one I did see was not scary looking. It was a little puppy barking and jumping around, playing with a chewed up old tennis ball. Yes, it was occasionally up on its hind legs, but it would flop over each time and land comedically backward or sideways. I had no idea it was anything other than a normal puppy dog. Seeing it playing with something man-made like that tennis ball also made it seem like someone's pet, as it played around in the same silly manner that a tame puppy might. As I was jogging around a rightward turn in the path, I expected to see the owner or owners of this cute little pup as I rounded the curve. Well, I guess in a sense that is exactly what happened. Except it wasn't a couple of kids or a nice old lady who were in charge of this little baby doggy. It was a big, upright, walking wolf-like creature who seemed angry at the tiny pup. It had its teeth bared, and it posed as though it were about to pounce on the puppy and tear it to tiny bits. But when it did pounce, it did so in a playful manner, and the puppy reacted not with terror, but with joy, returning the mock attack in kind. This was not a larger creature about to devour a smaller one. This was a parent, playing with its offspring,
This was an adult dogman training its pup in how to fight. But as all this information was flooding into my nervous system, the adult dogman noticed I was jogging closer and closer to it and to its pup. As its eyes locked onto mine, I noticed that it didn't seem too happy to see me getting so close to its offspring. As big as the creature was, it somehow made itself seem even bigger than that once it became aware of my presence. It loomed over me and took a step out into the lane toward me, effectively blocking my path. I could have tried to run around it, but it might have been able to grab me or maul me if I did that. So I did not do that. I sort of started running backward and sideways. I withdrew from the scene, heading back in the direction I had come in, but I did not risk looking away from those two creatures until they were well out of my sight. And once they were, believe me, I sprinted for home. The adult of the two, I don't know enough about canines to tell you if it was the mother or the father. I didn't notice its plumbing, let's just put it that way. But that was a real werewolf, as Linda Godfrey used to call him. That was a dogman, or else a dog lady. That puppy had a dog dad or a dog mom, I'm not sure which. And that's the only part of that story that I'm sure of.
It's a classic rollover, play with the scary stories, got it. It's a classic rollover, put it in a stand go to logo. Available in white, black, navy, gray, or pink. Link is in the description.
My little German Shepherd made friends with a dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. For a couple of years when I was a kid, my father and I lived illegally with our pet German Shepherd Grover in the Rat Lake Swamp area of Wisconsin. And when I say the area, I mean we basically lived in the swamp, except when we would get found out. And then we'd go on the run and find some other place to camp for a while. It wasn't illegal for us to be carrying camping equipment from one place to another, so we tried to limit our experiences with law enforcement to those times when our tents were in our backpacks and we were on the move. Because Dad didn't want to get found out, we would camp in some places that were even hard for the forest rangers to get to. In that way, we almost always managed to stay hidden. Unfortunately, one of the best hiding spots we ever found was also close to the home of this big dogman. He kept coming around and bothering us whenever Grover was taking a nap inside the tent. That dogman stole my trail mix one time, and I don't even think dogs like trail mix. In fact, I know they don't. So this was a big, bad dogman, like a werewolf kind of a beast. I saw him up on his hind legs, and he was 1.5 feet taller than I was. I saw him down on all fours, and he was still as tall as me, looking me directly in my eye. Yeah, we had a few run-ins with him, but in retrospect, all he actually did was scare us. We didn't know at the time that he wasn't going to try and eat us, though. Whenever I saw this creature, he looked unhappy that I was there. He looked hungry, too. He never seemed to be gone for too long. He was always haunting us while we camped in that part of the woods. So the advantage was that the rangers steered clear of that part of the forest, but the disadvantage was that we could clearly see why they did. So Grover the dog was not a young pup. He was an old fellow, and he was about 2 years from leaving us. None of us knew how old he was when he went, but he was old in dog years. So by this time, we had to walk around much of the day just to stay free. And Grover would jump inside a tent every time we pitched one. He'd fall asleep faster than any dog I'd ever known. Obviously, he was also a sound sleeper, considering he never woke up when that dogman came around to bother me and Dad. But one night, when we had caught some weird-looking kind of fish in the swamp, Both Grover and the Dogman came around sniffing the air at the same time, for the first time. One thing about Grover was that he was always lined up first for dinner. I guess this Dogman figured the same thing though, so the two of them practically bumped into each other before they even took notice of each other. At first, of course, the big one took an interest in the smaller one. I mean to say he took an interest in making sure that little dog didn't think he was going to be getting any of that weird little swamp fish that was cooking on the fire. I felt like I was going to be sick. Grover was the only reminder that Dad and I used to be part of a normal family, with a real house, and a real address, and all that stuff. There's really nothing wrong with being nomads if that's your choice, but we ran to the woods as our last chance for survival. It wasn't what we wanted to do. It was what we had to do. So I always wished we could get a place to live again before Grover's final days came. And we did manage to do that later on. But when I heard that big dogman that had been bothering me and my dad growling at little Grover, I nearly lost it. I didn't know what to do, and I stood up to run over there and intervene. Dad grabbed me by the arm and pulled me roughly back down. There was nothing I could do except watch, as that dogman smelled my little friend all over, like he was lunch. But then, out of nowhere, Grover started flipping out. He snapped back at the much larger dogman, and the dogman pulled back in absolute fear. That was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, and I still chuckle when I think about it. The big old dogman squeaked, and he ran away into the night, finally leaving us alone. And it was our little German shepherd Grover who chased the big beast off. Well, the next morning we awoke to find the dogman back in our camp, but this time he was pouncing around playing a dog game of some sort with Grover. The two of them were so excited to be playing this game, whatever it was. Grover seemed to be the alpha, and the dogman kept jumping and running away whenever Grover would chase him. It was kind of cute. It's a shame we didn't have any cameras or cell phones or anything like that in those days, although if we did, we would have sold them for food anyway. At any rate, that turned out to be a funny story when it could have been a tragic one. Grover just never considered that he might have been in danger. He was too big a personality for anyone to have for lunch. His belief in himself triumphed over reality itself and the hungry stomach of a large feral dogman. And that's the story of the time when my little German shepherd made friends with a dogman.
If I wear a spinny hat, will I look all hunky? Will I look like that handsome chap from that TV show, The Monkees? Everybody wants a woolen cat. The scary stories, beanie hat. Everybody knows it's a natural fact. The scary stories, beanie hat. Link is in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Mr. Spinks, he's a monkey. Mr. Spinks, he's awful funky. Please join me in thanking tonight's executive producer, Mr. Spinks, the movie hosting monkey. Please subscribe to his channel, it's one of my favorites. Mr. Spinks gets to see our secret uncensored episodes, and so can you. Here to explain more is a small dark-furred cryptid named Henry. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above
gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.